All right, guys. We are going to start with day three of Moderation Made Easy. This is your easy holiday guide to nutrition. Sorry, I'm very distracted because I've got my sidekick here trying to get into my lap. But I want to get you guys set up to be able to have actual tools, some strategies as you move into the holiday season. Because I know that for the average person gains like 8 pounds over the holidays and then really has a hard time getting that back off if they do at all. So I wanted to be able to give you guys some basic tools on how to navigate this holiday season, whether your goal is to actually lose weight or whether your goal is just to maintain. You can use this for either of those things and still enjoy the holiday season without feeling like you can't enjoy the foods that you like. So we're going to get started with day three. And these are concepts and strategies that I have pulled from my mini course, Macros to Moderation. I will openly tell you that for most of my clients, they do spend a good deal of time learning macros, learning how to food log so that they have a better understanding of what they're doing, the habits that they have, and what works for their body. But I also make sure that we sprinkle in times of moderation, and I feel that it's really important so that you don't feel like you always have to log food in order to get to your goal and be able to sustain it. So Moderation 365 is a method that I learned about 5 years ago. It's basically how I eat most of the time now. I don't track my macros very often. But it's a method that helps you learn how your body responds to certain foods so you can eat healthy and stress free for good and not feel like you always have to be food logging. And so today we're going to talk about mindfulness, exposure therapy, which is, I think, an intermittent sampling, is the thing that kind of is scary for some people. I'm going to walk you through what that looks like. We're going to start with mindfulness and why mindfulness. Well, number one, mindfulness, I think, is that word is something that's been kind of overused over time. But when it comes to nutrition, it's literally just running quick little scans and utilizing biofeedback cues. Instead of having food rules per se, you're paying attention to things like cravings, how satiated you are, your energy levels. All you have to do, and we'll go through it today, it really is just a quick scan, and it actually takes less effort once you practice and get some reps in being able to do this. And I'm going to give you some tools to do that. But they really are just quick scans and awareness of how you're feeling in your body right now in terms of, again, cravings, satiety, energy levels, things like that. So just to practice for a second, I want you to think about this and like see if you can cue in to the bottom of your feet. Can you feel any sensation, any sensation at all? Is it that you have socks on and you can feel your socks against your feet? Are your feet on the floor? Like I'm sitting and my feet are on the floor, but just the balls of my feet are on the floor, so I can feel the floor through the balls of my feet. But if I pay attention, I can feel my socks on the arch of my foot and through the heel of my foot. I can feel like my left big toe is kind of like now that I'm paying attention is kind of crunched in, right? Like, so see if you can pay attention to those feelings in the bottom of your feet. That is a mindfulness scan. That's all this is, right? It's just paying attention to some of the cues that are coming up through your body. And what we want to do to be able to, excuse me, to be able to implement this is just to ask yourself real quick questions that give you an idea of where you're at in the moment. So, how hungry am I right now? So, think about that. How hungry are you right now on a scale from 1 to 10? 1 is I'm not hungry at all. 10 is I'm starving. I'm about to eat somebody's face off, right? Like, what would you rate yourself? 7, 8, 9, 4, right? How full am I right now? Am I an 8, like I'm not hungry at all, but I'm also not overstuffed? Like, kind of rate yourself. Am I craving anything right now? I'm craving chocolate. How satisfied do I feel with the meal I've just eaten, right? Is my energy stable? So you can just ask these quick questions and kind of cue in to see how you're feeling. And what it does is it gives you a little bit of time to think through what your decisions are instead of just knee-jerk reacting to to like, I just want to eat something without really even thinking about it or just out of habit. So, what we want to do is give you some tools for mindfulness. And what I do recommend is to use it as a practice, because remember, things that you're not used to doing, your brain isn't going to remind you to do it. So you won't even run these scans, you won't even think about it. So what I recommend you do is in the beginning, you can use little prompts to get yourself used to running these quick little mindfulness scans, right? So one of the things that I recommend, and then keep it in mind, this is just a prompting with an alarm or post-it notes. The tool is about prompting you to run a quick scan. So what you can do is use what I like is the timer on your phone, because what happens is if you use post-it notes, like I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but like you can put a post-it note up and you may notice it like initially for a little bit, but like after a couple of hours, or especially after a couple of days, you just don't really notice it after a while. Like it's kind of like putting sticky notes on your refrigerator or things that you want to remember, and after a while they're just part of the fridge. So I do like setting an alarm because it kind of disrupts your day, and you could just set an alarm at different times during the day where it's like, hey, mindfulness scan, and you just kind of go, okay, am I hungry? How hungry am I? How am I feeling? How's my energy levels? You don't even have to write anything down. You don't have to journal anything. I'm hoping I don't sneeze. um Sorry. You don't have to do anything elaborate. All you're doing is just running a quick scan while you're running through some of those questions. You're going to ask some of the mindfulness questions that I mentioned before. And the key is not to judge the answer. You want to be clinical, not critical. Remember that one. Clinical, not critical. We're just gathering data. That's all we're doing, right? So I want you to start to practice being mindful and understanding where your body is at, because this is going to be important as you move forward. And we're going to go into exposure therapy and intermittent sampling. And this is the one I think where people start to get a little bit nervous about this, because most people, I guess I should say, have foods that they feel like they can't be around because they don't trust themselves around them. So exposure therapy and intermittent sampling, the reality is that being scared to be around certain foods because you don't trust yourself around them is a very fragile way to live. For me, it used to be pastries, especially pastries that have pumpkin in them, or chocolate. Those were all things, donuts, like all of those things were things that I didn't trust myself around. Like if you can think about it, like you probably know what they are. I had a client once that we were doing this, and it was a very specific um, trail mix and I didn't remember what all was in it, but she was just like, I do not trust myself around this trail mix because I'll eat the whole thing. And so we went through this process, and I'll explain as we go through it, like what happened as she did this. So what we do is we tend to put certain foods on pedestals, right? Like they're like this amazing thing. And so then we start to put them on a pedestal, and then we become afraid of being around them, that we can't control ourselves around them. So exposure therapy and intermittent sampling is a strategic exposure to these so-called trigger foods, so that over time it loses its luster. And I know that that can be scary. And this was scary for this client. She was just like, I don't think so. There's never going to be a time where it loses its luster. It did. It did. Um, it did after she ate a lot of it, but eventually it did. So just know that strategic exposure actually over time loses its luster, and it makes it easier to find that moderation place. And what it does is it allows us to learn to trust ourselves around food again, right? Like it teaches you how you can have things and take a couple bites, and also then know through a mindfulness scan when you've had enough and you can move on, right? So nothing is off the table. So over time, those forbidden foods lose some of their appeal. And I can honestly tell you that this is what I experienced, right? Because I used to be just like most people too, where I'm like, oh, that's a bad food. You can't have this. And I would judge food and judge my ability to stay away from those foods. But once I learned moderation, literally nothing is off the table. Now, I will tell you, I steer clear of gluten. I'm discerning with the gluten that I eat. I make sure that it's worth it. So there's a lot of things that I'm like, not worth it, right? But it's not forbidden. If I had bread today and it was fully gluten loaded, and totally worth it, right? So nothing is off the table. And when you learn to do that, you do get more discerning with just like I don't really want that. You stop eating things just because you're used to eating them. And over time, you create this evidence for yourself that you can trust yourself around food, and that keeping food in the house that normally triggers you is actually fine. Like you're okay. And I hear this a lot from clients who are like, ah, all the Halloween candy. And I'm like, well, that's fine. You don't have to throw it out. Like we want to be able to keep it around and you learn how to be around it. So in practice, here's the scary part. Here's what we do. Um, in practice, you want to deliberately keep food in the house that you are afraid to have around. I would pick one thing. And the goal is to take a few bites and then put it back with permission to come back in 20 to 30 minutes. Now, I'll use the story that I started with this client. And this has been a couple years. I don't know. Sometimes things just stick out in my brain. Probably just because she freaked out. She did the trail mix thing. And she had the first day and she was like, okay, like took a few bites and then I put it back. She was literally like every 30 minutes, she was like back grabbing another handful. And by I think day 2 or 3, she was sending me messages. She's like, I ate the whole thing and I went and got more and I'm gonna get fat. She was really scared. She was freaking out. I'm like, listen, like it's okay because at some point, yes, the scale went up a couple pounds because she was eating a lot of nuts and it was a lot of high calorie, which then just makes her even more scared, right? And I said, listen, like, trust the process. At some point, it will become less desirable. And it did. And it took less than a week. And she stuck through it. And eventually she was like, okay, I get it. Like, eventually she forgot that it was even there. She forgot that the trail mix was there. So it does over time give you confidence that you can be around these foods because all of a sudden it's like, okay, they're not so forbidden. It's sitting up in the pantry. And I think it stayed there for a long time and she forgot that it was even there. So that is your assignment is I want you to think of like one thing that you're like, oh, I can never be around that food. I could never be around this food. And what I want you to do is keep it in your house. I want you to put it somewhere that you see it. Don't hide it from yourself. Trust the process. And what you're going to do is take a few bites and then you're going to put it back. And what will probably happen is you're going to have this urge to eat more. And you're going to surf that urge, giving yourself permission to come back in 20 to 30 minutes. Like in 20 to 30 minutes, if I want some more, I'm going to come back and I'm going to have some more. And that's how you're going to set this up. And all you're going to do is in 20 to 30 minutes go, do I want more? Now, in the beginning, you probably will. In the beginning, your brain is going to be like, yes, go get it. What time is it? Like, right? Like it'll do that. But over time, it will forget and it will stop doing that because it's just not as like the forbiddenness makes it less appealing. So in practice, we want to detach from that outcome. This is about getting your reps in over time so that you learn how to do this. Just know that yes, in the beginning, you probably are going to overeat and feel like you're afraid and you have no control, but trust the process. Over time, you will get to a place where it where it just won't be so appealing. It doesn't matter if you end up eating the whole thing. What matters is how you eat it. That like couple bites, walk away, couple bites, walk away. That you're teaching yourself that you have the ability to do so. And then your brain remembers that. You remember that. Over time, the practice results in less stress and also less binging. So when you overeat, things to remember that nothing is irreversible. Like with her, like she ate a lot of ate a lot of trail mix, and so yeah, the scale went up a couple pounds that first week, and then the next week it went right back down to where it was, and everything was fine. Nothing is irreversible. So if it starts to get out of control, and you're like 2 weeks later, John, I'm out of control, and it never goes that long. But if it did, it's not irreversible. You could always just go, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. So just remember that. If at some point you feel like it's just not getting any better, you can always stop and you can tell yourself that so that you can start to trust the process. You have to keep in mind that I think that women have been programmed about this whole calories in, calories out thing. And the metabolism is way more complex than that. And it is certainly not that fragile. It is not something that responds to something you do in a day. It is not something that responds to something that you do in a week. It's always auto-regulating. It's always changing based on your inputs, right? So it's always moving around. And it adapts to everything that you do. So just know that it's not a fragile thing, and the extra 200 to 400 calories, or even 1,000 calories, it's not gonna mess with anything. Who was I talking to yesterday? And we started to do the math on it, and I think she was afraid. What was it that she was afraid she was going to gain like 6 pounds or something? And we did the math on it, and I'm like, okay, well, do the math so that your brain understands it. You're afraid that over this period of time you're going to gain 6, 7 pounds. Well, it takes 3,500 calories to gain a pound, right? So you would need to eat, I think we figured out it ended up being like 12,000 calories in addition to what she's already eating in that day in order for that to happen in that time frame. I was like, would you eat an extra 12,000 calories? And I think it was a couple of days, 2, 3 days. She's like, no. And I'm like, right. So that's not possible. Like, it's not going to happen. So just know that it's not that fragile. What matters is what you're doing 80% of the time. And that's where women get tripped up, is because they think that they're doing like all these things. But if you really pay attention, it's what you're doing 80% of the time. Pay attention to what is happening during that 80%. That's what we care about. And as you're going through this, if you do overeat, resist the urge to like tighten up. I gotta get rid of it, right? Like, don't do that. Just trust the process and be like, okay, I want to get to a place. I want to be the type of person who can be around food and not be afraid of it. The other thing you can do, and I recommend you do this, is to actually run an evaluation, because remember, we want to be clinical versus critical. And this is something that I run with clients all the time, where they'll say things like, oh, my cravings are going up. I've noticed I've been a little bit more hungry. And when I'm looking at stuff and I'm starting to ask them questions, I'm going to look at biofeedback. I'm going to look at protein. I can tell you that in almost every single case, when somebody comes back to me and they're like, my hunger went up, I'm craving a little bit more, it goes back to these things: protein, veggies, and water. Those have slipped. They're like, oh yeah, I probably haven't been getting as my protein yet. Yeah, I haven't eaten a vegetable in like 5 days, right? And so that affects their hunger and their cravings, right? Oh, my sleep has been disrupted. Okay, that will affect that as well. Things have been stressful at work. We've got a big project going on, or a takeover, or whatever, and so all of a sudden stress is up, and so now they're noticing that they're getting more cravings. They're preemptive cheats. They're not working those in. So all of a sudden, maybe they're going to, and this happens quite a bit too, where somebody will like really dial in their nutrition. And then all of a sudden, a couple weeks later on a weekend, they lose their mind because they weren't working those preemptive cheats, and they weren't working enough satisfaction in during the normal week, right? Volume of exercise can also affect whether your hunger and cravings go up. So you have to keep that in mind. What's going on emotionally, mentally, right? Like, so I think, did I talk about this yesterday? I think I did, where, literally we got home from Italy, and within a couple of hours, like we got home Saturday night, and within a couple of hours, our cat had a stress reaction, and we didn't know what it was. And so we had to take her to the emergency vet. So I hadn't slept in over 24 hours. I did not sleep on the plane, thinking that I was going to come home and sleep. So at 11 o'clock that night, we were in an emergency vet. We brought her home, and she was not going to let me sleep. And I was trying to keep an eye on her to make sure that she was okay. So I didn't sleep then. So it ended up being like 36 hours, and I was miserable. And guess what? Ended up getting sick, right? So immune system started to go down after all of that. And I can tell you that by Tuesday, Wednesday, all of a sudden my cravings went up, and all I wanted was sugar and chocolate. And so today's Thursday, right? It was yesterday, I think. I don't even remember what day it is. I started craving cookies. And so I made cookies, and I ate 7 of them. Well, I knew why. It's not like I'm a terrible person. I have no control. It's because I was stressed. I was sleep deprived. I was sick, right? Like, all of these things added up. And I'm like, okay, well, this is just what's happening. I know that that's what it is. And so running an evaluation was like, I don't need to judge this. I know that in a couple of days, when I start feeling better, all of that's going to go away, and it's fine. And it is getting better. So just run an evaluation, be clinical, don't critical. You're human. These things are going to happen, right? So let's put this into practice. What I want you to do is to choose one food that you are worried to have around. I want you to strategically plan to give yourself permission to have at least one serving each day. And this is what we did with this client that I was telling you about. I said you're allowed to have one serving each day, but after that serving, if you want more, all you have to do is tell yourself you can have more in 20, 30 minutes. And that's how you're going to do this. I can have more in 20, 30 minutes if I still want more, but you're going to strategically have one serving each day. I did this with, I believe it was chocolate muffins, was what I initially did this with when I learned this like 5 years ago. And so what I would do, and I still do this to this day, is I took these giant muffins and I would quarter them so that I wasn't eating an entire muffin. I was just eating a quarter one, which mentally was like, oh, how do you eat like a quarter of a muffin? And it messed with my head, but I would eat a quarter of it and I would just tell myself, you can come back in 20, 30 minutes and have another. And I'm sure I plowed through 2 to 3 muffins a day, but after a couple of days, I just stopped doing it. Right. And it got to a point where now I can have a little bit of a muffin and I'm typically fine. And then you're just going to evaluate how it went. How did I do? You know, run the evaluation on it, see how you do. So that is the first part of this. The other part of this is that I wanted to go through and talk about an abundance mindset and old food narratives. And this is important because we're heading into the holidays. And if you are someone who's going to be spending time with your family, this is going to trigger things that you learned from a very young age. These are old food narratives from operating from food scarcity. We all have them. It's food FOMO, and it's the anticipation of future deprivation. And this is what it looks like. This is a special occasion, so I should eat up. I'm never going to get this again, so I might as well eat it all, right? Will there be enough? This comes from like if you came from a larger family, or like for us, like we didn't have a lot of money growing up, and there was 4 kids, and it was just like we divvied things up, and there was times where you wanted more and there just wasn't any. So you have to kind of look back in your past and go, okay, where are some of these narratives coming from? I better eat now because if I get hungry later, watch out. This one was one of mine as well. If you are someone who ever feels like you get hangry, it's a blood sugar issue, by the way. And so I went through this because I'm like, I'm not about to get hungry. So I would plan like I better fill up now because who knows when you're going to get fed again, right? Like is that an old food narrative where in your household it was like there were long gaps where you didn't have access to food? I need to get my money's worth. I had a client who she was so funny. They traveled a lot and they would go to these buffets. And so she was like, I don't know, Jen, I just feel like I got to get my money's worth. Like I paid this, $30 or $50, whatever, for this buffet. And so for me to kind of pick at food and stuff, like I need to get my money's worth. Like, is that a narrative that you have? I hate wasting food. That's a big one. I used to get, and I did this on social media. I don't do it so much anymore, but when I would show people on social media, like I would take a couple bites of something and I would throw the rest away, and people would be just so offended that I was wasting food, right? Like that's a food narrative that we have. Um, so think about like which ones maybe kind of stand out to you. I think there's a couple more that we'll go through in here. And one of how this all kind of comes together is as we're going into the holidays, thinking about situational eating and special occasion syndrome. So let me give you a couple of examples of what this looks like. It's where automatically associating a place or event with a food, an item that we assume we must eat it to have the full experience. You probably can think of a couple right off the bat. Situational eating. Oops, let me roll this up just a little bit. Ooh, there we go. Popcorn at the movies. Have you ever gone to the movies and not gotten popcorn, not gotten anything from the stand, just went and watched the movie? Have you ever done that? Does it feel weird to do that? Holidays, grandma's special pumpkin pie or mom's mac and cheese. Like on the holidays, is there something that somebody makes that's like, that's the experience that we have to have, like the full experience? We've got to eat that thing, right? Elephant ears at the county fair or cheesecake at the Cheesecake Factory. Of course, you eat cheesecake at the Cheesecake Factory. Like, what else would you eat, right? Like, so this is situational eating or special occasion syndrome where we feel like we must have the thing in order to have the full experience. I got this one a lot when we were in Italy. There was like, have pizza for me, or have gelato for me, or eat up all the pasta, right? Because that's what Italy is known for. And yes, there is a lot of it. I get it now. Um, for me, really, like it wasn't so much so. Like I think I had gelato once, maybe twice. I don't even remember. I don't remember. I had pizza twice, twice, three times. I had pizza three times. First time it wasn't even very good. The second time it was okay, right? Pasta. I had some good ones. I had some not so great ones. But it's like, oh, this is Italy. Like you gotta eat it up because you're never gonna get this again, right? All you can eat buffets. You gotta get your money's worth, right? We don't want to waste food. So as I'm going through these, do any of these stick out to you? Or any of these like, oh yeah, I definitely do that, right? Most of us do quite a few of these. This this all goes back to those old food narratives. Clean your plate when you're young. Did you get that? Clean your plate when you were younger. Can't leave the table till you clean your plate. That was us. Finish your dinner before you can have dessert. Also, if you grew up around food pushers, I did not grow up around food pushers, but I know a lot of my clients do. And so there's like a lot of anxiety around the holidays and people that are like, ah, eat more and fill your plate. And they're always just like, ah, it's fine. Like, what do you want a diet? Like if you have that experience, right? There are starving children in Africa. I got that one a lot. And just having guilt, shame, and behaviors that we have that need to be unlearned because they affect the way that we look at food now. So here are the tools in order to maneuver some of this. And the first one was the hard one for me, but it made the biggest difference in this narrative. I had to learn how to start sharing food, and I didn't like it. And I didn't do it until actually I got with Michael. And what would happen is we would go out to eat. Now, mind you, I don't eat like a lot of gluten, and so I am discerning with what I eat. And so when we would go out, sometimes I would order like, let's just say I ordered a burger, no bun, and a side of sweet potato fries or something like that, a piece of chicken, like a chicken sandwich, but no bun. And then I would order sweet potato fries or side salad or whatever. And so when I would get those sweet potato fries, to me, that's my starch. And so it's very valuable. It's like, that's my starch. That's my food, right? So here I have this piece of chicken and the good thing and the sweet potato fries. And Michael would always reach across and start eating my sweet potato fries. And in my head, I'm just like, is he doing? Like, that is my starch. And I had a really hard time learning to share my food because it was like, it was my valuable thing. I didn't like people eating my food. This is mine, right? And once I went through this course, um, Jill, we were going through it, and you know she was coaching me on that, and she's like, okay, so like let me ask you a question. Let's say that you know he's eating your fries, and all of a sudden the fries are gone but you want more. What happens? And I'm like, well, then I'm out of fries. And she's like, okay, could you order more? Could you just say, hey, I need another order of fries? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, okay. So the thing is that there's always more. There's always more food that you can have. So if you can practice offering up bites and sips, what it does is it reinforces that there is enough to go around. There is plenty of food. And I had to learn this. Like, I can literally order this at any time if I'm still hungry. I can order more fries. I can order another chicken sandwich if I wanted to. Like, there's more food. If you look, especially here in the United States, like, you literally go to any corner and get access to food if you're hungry. There's not a limit of food around us. There's enough to go around. So I don't have to eat all of this right now. I literally could just stop right now, put this in the fridge, and then if I want more later, I can go back and eat more later because there is more where that came from. And so if you can do that and then practice surfing the urge, because we all have this urge like, oh, but it's so yummy. It's so good. I got to eat it all now, right? But if you can practice stopping, and this was one of my DNCs, was learning to stop at 80% full. If you can surf the urge and disappointment of not eating more, it builds that muscle where, and I used to do this more often, but not as much now, but I used to do it all the time, where in the middle of the day I would have like just clients back to back, and I used to make these big ass salads. And so I would just chop it all up in this giant bowl, and I would just kind of like eat and then just stop, and it would just sit here all day. Right. So what it did is it taught me the ability to just like eat for a little bit and then just sit there and look at food and not eat it. Right. So you surf the urge and the disappointment of not eating right in that very moment. The reality is you can always order more. You can always have any food, any day of the week, any time of year. So for me, Thanksgiving means pumpkin pie. It's the only thing that I really have to have. I remember when I was when I back before I had my business, I ran personal training company all over the country. And so I lived on the road. And so there were many a Thanksgiving that I ate out of a vending machine. But I would always go and get a pumpkin pie from the best place that I could find. And I would eat the entire pumpkin pie like all day on Thanksgiving. Like that would just be like, I'm going to have pie and like whatever else, like a pizza pocket or something like that. But for me, pumpkin pie is the thing that I want. And I can still do that. But the reality is, like, I could go at any time of year and find a pumpkin pie in the frozen food section if I really wanted pumpkin pie. I could find pumpkin filling and make myself a pumpkin pie any day of the week or time of year that I wanted to. So it's not limited to these times where you feel like you have to get it all in. So intentionally put some of it away and go eat the rest of it 20 minutes later. It's just a practice. It's a practice of going, okay, I'm going to eat some of this now. I'm going to put some of it away. And then in 20 minutes, I'm going to go eat the rest of it. Try it sometime. It will poke you. It's going to poke your brain, and you're going to have to surf that urge of like, oh, that's just weird. Like I definitely could eat more. Surf that urge, practice that, and with the practice, you'll get better at it. It is permission based eating. So you are actually saying yes more than you say no, because you literally are saying, I can eat whatever I want. I can eat whenever I want. I'm just not going to eat it all in one serving and stuff myself. So I'm going to eat some, I'm going to put it away, and then I'm going to come back to it knowing that there's always more. So putting it into practice, I want you to think about what are your old food narratives. Where do they come from? Most of them are going to come from your childhood. They come from scarcity. They come from having a big family where you had to share food. Where did these come from? For me, that's where they came from. It was not wasting food. It was knowing that I had three older brothers with big appetites. And so I was trying to get mine, right, of the good stuff. Not wasting food that, you know, we were not well off. We were kind of poor, and so food had a lot of value to it. And so you definitely were not going to waste it, and you definitely were not going to leave the table until you finished your plate, right? So I know that that's where my food narratives came from. So where do you find yourself in scarcity? Are you not wanting to get hungry? Do you do like a Sunday night roundup? I call it last suppering on the weekends, right? Where I've just got a last supper everything. I used to do this a lot too, where it was like if I started to mess up on a Friday or a Saturday, and then I was like, okay, so what are the foods that I have to have this weekend since I'm not going to get to have them again? So it was like, okay, let me make sure I have pizza, and let me make sure I have a hamburger, and then let me make sure I have a milkshake, let me make sure I get Dairy Queen, like let me, you know what I mean? Let me make sure I get a cake because I want to make sure I have that. And then that way I shoved it all into these pockets over the weekend so that I could start fresh on Monday, only to do this over and over and over again. Right? So what are your behaviors and where do you think that they come from? Was it fighting your siblings for food as a kid? Getting your money's worth, not wasting food? Like where do your old food narratives come from? And more importantly, once you identify them, what can you say to yourself to bring you back to food abundance and dissipate the urge to eat it all now. For me, it really was kind of feeling dumb when she said that to me, like, you could order more fries. And I'm like, I could order more fries. You're right. Like, there's not, you know, there's plenty of sweet potato fries. I'm sure that they would be happy to serve me. And then once you realize that, and you're looking at like there's a 7-Eleven, there's a Circle K, there's a store, there's like we have access to so much food that there's really never a time that I'm without it, that I need to worry about not having food. And so once I realized that, I was like, there's always more food. I can always have more later. If I don't get it all in now or I get hungry later, there's no rule that says I can't eat later. I don't put that rule on myself. And so once I realized that, my mantra or what I tell myself is like there's always more. You can always have more food later if you want it. You can have it. I don't tell myself no. I also don't tell myself that I can't have a certain type of food. So, and what that does is it brings confidence in what I'm doing in the moment. So, hopefully that is helpful. Any questions so far? You can throw them in the chat.